So let's jump right into it and get going. Thank you everybody for attending episode 46 in Let's Talk Recruiting. We're getting near that 50 mark. Today's topic is how to build a recruiting team from scratch. Now, typically that's something for a startup company that's just growing, what have you. But I think in this day and age, with kind of the shutdown of the country, maybe we're not starting from scratch, but I think a lot of teams may be restarting from scratch or what have you, dealing with bringing people back or lost people that they lost. What do they do now? So today's topic, we're going to talk about structuring that, and hopefully the kickoff for the country to get back into gear will be more sooner than later. But with us today, we have Tom Koenig out of San Francisco, Dave Quinn out of Chicago, Brian, is it Poog? Am I getting that right?
Oh, no, it's Pew.
Pew. Oh, I wasn't even close. Brian Pew. Sorry about that. Also out of San Francisco, and Crystal Brown out of the DC, Baltimore area. So we're going to do kind of a round robin to talk around the key points that we each have. And Tom, I'm going to start off with you, if that's okay.
Sounds great. Thanks again for having me, Sean. I'm excited to talk through this with everybody today. To kind of further introduce myself, I work for a technology company called Skills in San Francisco. I've been a part of the company for about 6 years. So way back in the day, I was the first people person hired, and nonetheless starting our recruiting team from scratch. So some of the things that I wanted to kind of talk about today with everyone, and happy to answer questions, is just really around kind of standing up the process framework to really make sure that you can scale. When I first joined Skills, we didn't have any ATS. The team was essentially tracking candidates in a giant spreadsheet, and that was a bit chaotic. So I think one of the first two things that I did when I actually joined Skills was I put together essentially what I like to call just general SLAs throughout the organization. So thinking about what is our general process going to be, who's going to be owners of that, and what's kind of the time commitments that we need to do that. I rolled that out to our executive team to get their alignment, and then throughout the rest of the organization, which was much smaller. It was 12 people I needed to get buy-in from, but ultimately I got the whole company to buy in and abide by these. Rather than working off of spreadsheets, I went through kind of a process or cost benefit analysis to essentially stand up our applicant tracking system. And one of the things that I was looking for, not only price was really important to me as the company was much smaller today, but was looking for an ATS that allowed us to essentially have holds or controls to help us abide by these processes. So that way I wasn't having to do that on a day by day or working through that. We could rely upon our infrastructure, because as we onboarded new hiring managers, new recruiters onto the team, that can really help us kind of stay within that framework. So those are a few of the things that I thought were really important, but I think at the end of the day, it's really a team effort. So all in all, I just wanted to say that getting company-wide buy-in and making sure that everyone's aligned of what their role is and what those service level agreements are is really a few things that I think need to essentially start that recruiting team from scratch.
Tom, with SLAs, are you putting them in writing with the group or the buy-in with the group? Is this something that you're putting
Yeah.
let me be real specific. Are you putting it in a deck, or are you kind of writing a document almost like a playbook in effect?
Yeah, so it started out as a document. So it was a kind of a multi-page living, breathing document. Over time, that's evolved into a deck. So that way it's kind of more digestible. So that way somebody doesn't have to read through my multi-page. But now it has evolved to a deck, and we get really explicit. So if it's, hey, we need to respond to all direct applicants within 48 hours, because sometimes that's split between the recruiter or the hiring manager. But we have an SLA at our company of making sure that we go through all those direct applicants within 48 hours, and we're explicit about it.
What ATS did you go with when you were first starting off?
Yeah, when we did a trial with a company called Resumator. It was one of the cheapest options out there. After we did our trial and got to reevaluate that after 6 months, we ultimately went with Greenhouse, which is the applicant tracking system that we do today, as it had much better controls, and analytics was something that I also wanted to lean upon.
Brian, if you're talking, you're on mute. Oh, if you're talking to somebody else, maybe.
Talking to somebody else in the room.
Sorry. All right, I'm messing up all over with you today. Tom, was your company, and I'm asking this because I'm dealing with this at a company that I support now, where they're over the 1,000 employee mark, but they hit stages, right? They started small, they got the product, they went public, now they're at this and that. And the head of TA works on forecasting and planning, because now they're getting to the point where they're giving him, here's our net new growth plan for this quarter next year. When we talk about setting up infrastructure, are you setting up the infrastructure to change as you go, or is your company planning for growth, or anything around that regard, around being that long-term planner?
Yeah, I would say that's something that I would say we've gotten a hell of a lot better at over the last couple of years. I would say back in the day when it was me and 12 other people trying to build the business, I would say our growth plans were not as aggressive in terms of the sheer number of headcount. But I would say over the last year or so, I've really, really partnered with our FP&A team to think about, hey, what are you receiving? How are we forecasting it? How do we go through the approval process of actually opening those roles? And then how do we hold those hiring managers accountable to make sure that they ultimately want to hire this role before we put them accountable to these SLAs or put resources associated to it on my team. So I'd say it's been an evolution, and it's something that we've kind of baked into our processes now.
Do you track the version number on that document?
We just have last updated date, but version would have been interesting. We'd probably be at well over a dozen today.
Yeah, I always reset by quarter so it doesn't look too crazy. To the rest of the panel, any thoughts around like setting up that structure kind of at that very, hey, we're a young, small size company looking to be successful first and then grow? I think that comes first, right? Be successful first, grow second.
Hey, it's Dave. Yeah, I think it's so important to set those guidelines, right? And to have those processes and then to hold your team accountable, right? That there's something that you can measure them against, right? And hold the team accountable. And I always say, hey, we'll set the framework. How you get there is up to you, as long as you are doing it within our processes, following our processes and are compliant. But I think those guidelines are really important to set a common language and set common goals for the team.
Mr. O'Brien, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of process and recipe. For me, setting up new teams and putting, as he put it, framework or structure in place, fantastic. In fact, I'm a little bit OCD when it comes to having my checklist. Anybody that's ever worked with me knows that I'm a big checklist guy. And as we run through process and as we put candidates into process, we 100% make sure that every box is checked along the way. When I go into my little spiel about, what I focus on first and foremost, we even have a checklist of things that we run through. So spot on to Tom.
Completely agreed. I think for us, it has been, I guess I'll say Bible, been like our Bible. And so it's something that we know that is etched in stone, and we can modify it and tailor it when needed, but it definitely allows for the team to know what they're supposed to do, when they're supposed to do it, how they're supposed to do it. And it's even more important for when you have newcomers to the team, so it's already there for them.
I like the phrase when it comes to planning, whether you're using tasks or milestones or tasks within milestones, the phrase contingent upon. So if you know where you're trying to get to, but you can't exactly determine when that's going to occur, a lot like recruiting, because it's so reactive, having your contingent upon steps is sort of a crucial key. I think project managers, there's a special term for it. I don't know if it's contingent upon or something to that effect, but letting you know you can't do step 2 until step 1 is done. Milestones, okay. Yeah, I like that. Is it a dependency or is it contingency? Can't remember.
Is there a difference?
Probably not. All right. Excellent. Hey, Brian, I'm a big fan of checklists too. Have you ever read the Checklist Manifesto?
No. Who's the author? I got to get it.
That I don't know, but I do know it's on Amazon. But it's sort of interesting. I think it's an MD he's a surgical doctor, which is pretty crucial to make sure you check all the boxes when you're doing surgery. All right. Excellent, Tom. Thank you. Dave, can we jump over to you?
Sure, absolutely. So thank you for having me. This is my second panel, so I appreciate being asked back, I guess. So thank you. So my focus is going to be on, when we talk about team, is talk about how we build hire team members, hire recruiters, and specifically, I'm going to talk a little bit about remote locations. As Sean mentioned, our headquarters are in Chicago, but CME Group is a global organization, and we have, in the past 5+ years, built some technology centers in different parts of the world: Belfast, Bangalore, most recently Tel Aviv. And so I want to talk a little bit about Bangalore in particular, where we were entering a new market, and how we built our team there. So, the first thing I would say is, as Tom mentioned, you need to have strong processes and guidelines, and we're fortunate enough to have those in Chicago. But, from a people perspective, I think it's really important that you have, the trust and the relationships. And I'm fortunate to have someone on my team in Chicago that has worked with me for 12 years. I've been at CME Group for 12 years. He joined when I joined CME Group and had also worked with me prior. So it's really important to have someone like that can, not only be a good sounding board, but also be someone that, he's just a phenomenal collaborator, a great recruiter, et cetera. So I've been fortunate enough to have that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Bangalore. The first thing that we did when we were going to that new location is I reached out to my contacts and the relationships I had at former companies. I'm fortunate enough to work for Deloitte. I worked for Aon. And so I reached out to them knowing that they had set up offices in India and specifically in Bangalore. And so I reached out to them, talked to them about their experiences, but more importantly, asked them if I could speak with their contacts in those locations. And so prior to going to India, I spent a fair amount of time on conference calls late at night with people in that market, just to understand the marketplace, the location. And for those of you who have worked in India, that's a unique marketplace. And so, just to understand that was really, really important. And so when we got on the ground, I was able to meet with them face to face. I also spent a ton of time with recruiting vendors, recruiting agencies. They are so tapped into the marketplace. They have, a pulse on that. They're also, I use them for sources. Who have they worked with on the corporate side? Who are the best recruiters in the marketplace and why? And then got to know their people. And then we did what good recruiters do. We got out there and engaged and worked the marketplace, started getting some flow of candidates, cross-referencing, using references, different touch points to make sure that we were finding the right people. And that first hire for us, we were going to hire a few different recruiters, but that first one was going to be the most critical. And so, we went through a pretty exhaustive process to find that person. And as we all know, recruiting is a contact sport. So we talked to lots and lots of people and checked, different ways and so forth. And then the final thing that we did, and this goes directly to what Tom said, we needed the buy-in from our customers in that marketplace. So our stakeholders in India, we needed to make sure that they were a part of this process. I always say people don't argue with their own data, right? And so if they're involved and they're a part of that process, they're going to partner with this person, or our odds are going to be greatly increased if we do that. Believe me, I've experienced the other way where we didn't involve them, and it was a bit of a nightmare. So we got that person in, and I'm really happy to report is we hired this person in that location. He was the first recruiter. He helped us hire other recruiters. He was able to attract other people. He became the de facto kind of lead recruiter in that office, and he now runs our Asia Pacific recruiting team. And has been with us for 5+ years and has done just a phenomenal, job for us in that marketplace, and is a part of my leadership team. So, I would say those are the key things in building those, and they're applicable to anywhere, I believe. It's the same process that we use, because I think it's important to know what works for your organization. What works, what makes a great recruiter at CME Group might not be the same for another organization. And so, we had to make sure that we stayed to, our process and our knitting, so to speak, to when evaluating and vetting these candidates.
Now, David, sounds like, so you made a great hire there. Did you partner with any businesses that support businesses moving into India or anything like that?
That's a great question, Sean. We actually did on a broader scale. So we actually engaged with a consulting firm that looked at, kind of remote locations, and HR and recruiting was a component of that. And there were many components of that, including real estate operations, legal, purchasing, all those things. And HR and recruiting was a component of that.
So without naming names, did you feel satisfied with what you got from that service?
They validated a lot of things, Sean. I would say they weren't, you're talking about a broad-based kind of operational consulting firm. I did not expect them to be recruiting experts per se, but they did have someone that was a recruiting, SME, subject matter expert. And I spent a lot of time with him, quite honestly. So yes, it was a valuable firm to work with.
Yeah, kind of sticking with your recruiting as a contact sport, and each company is playing its own different version of the game. I look to those consulting services almost like a coach, kinda, but I'm still the floor coach, and I got to get players on the game, out in the court and play the game. Or it's like they give me some recipes, so to speak, but I got to go do the cooking.
That's right, and I think it's a really good point. I mean, as I said, India is a very unique market, and I can play any game as long as I know the rules, and there are some unique rules in India, and so they were very helpful in helping us understand the marketplace, the pace, what works, what doesn't work, et cetera.
So I'll ask you the same question I asked Tom. Did you create any type of playbook that's repeatable or a recipe?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of those tenets we used for Belfast and more recently in Tel Aviv. But I think the other thing I would say is that a lot of the things that we use to go to Bangalore, we also use when we hire a recruiter in Chicago or New York or London, because a lot of the practices that we use to find, engage talent, and get stakeholder buy-in are applicable in any market.
Yeah, but in my times as a recruiter, I was in recruiting, then I did some time in IT as a business systems analyst and came back into recruiting. One thing I hated doing as a BSA was documentation, right? Writing up all the Word docs and document everything, because by the time I finished that, something changed. But I didn't mind flow charting. So lately I find myself using Lucidchart, which is a website and a free account.
Okay.
Just flow charting my basic steps, which gives me that step-by-step 10,000 foot view. But knowing what's repeatable, because I think, to your point, Dave, learning and doing how to implement in a foreign country, whether it's Canada or India, right? One's easier than the other probably. That's a unique set of skills, and to cook that cheeseburger over and over again is sort of interesting. We got a lot of analogies going on this morning, so I'm going to keep with them.
Yeah.
Excellent. Anybody else to add to Dave's sort of piece about how it's different rolling into another country? Right. Let me ask you this, Dave. When you roll into so you've done several locations, right, internationally?
Yes.
Do they recruit the same people, or is it all local recruiting? And by that, I mean, are they recruiting globally to bring them to wherever they are?
Yeah. So for Bangalore, for example, we were building a tech development center. So the focus was, for the first couple of years, all in Bangalore. That has changed now that we built that center, and we continue to work on that center, but they also support, Tarun, who's my manager there, supports Singapore. He supports Tel Aviv and some other office locations as well.
The only reason I bring that up is some years ago I did a run with Electronic Arts with their sourcing teams globally. So they have, at the time, they had 13 studios across the world, and they would all be recruiting internationally. So we had to account for double recruiting the same software engineers and stuff like that. So it's an interesting dilemma when you have same companies recruiting the same people from across the seas.
Yeah.
Keep track of people. All right. Excellent. Thank you, Dave.
You bet.
Brian, let's jump over to you and your item.
Right on. Well, Dave actually set the table for me fairly nicely. He talked a lot about slowing down and deeply interviewing a key person to his team. So I'll sort of whet everybody's appetite with that, but give a quick background on myself. So I've been in the recruitment business for over 25 years. So I don't know if that's a good badge to wear or not. But I've had the opportunity to not only build teams from scratch in multiple locations, different cities, but I've also had the unique opportunity to rebuild teams and or take teams that were debunked or struggling and build them back from ground zero. So, my thing is, and what I've developed over the years, and I'm a big coaching advocate. Obviously, my backdrop kind of gives it away. I'm also a high school football coach in my off hours, and I am all about team culture. And so when I look to build a team from scratch, one of the key or cornerstone components that I look for in any individual that's going to come on board is really their cultural match to the organization. Right from the get-go, when I meet somebody, when I talk to somebody, early members to the team, I'm digging into their purpose. And, it sounds a little maybe warm fuzzy. It sounds a little bit nebulous to some folks, but I will tell you that once you have put a winning culture in place amongst a recruiting team, you pretty much will always advocate that you're never going to go away from having a strong culture. And to get there, and again, Dave touched on it perfectly, you deeply engage with the first people in the door. So whether it's going to be a new office or a new team in a new location, et cetera, that first person in the door has got to be a foundationary block of what you're going to look to achieve on a bigger scale. So I love that Tom deeply touched on structure process. That is key. Dave took it another step and talked about how to go through the process, and even in another country. For me, I've got to have those things in place, but I need everyone to play a part in looking at this person culturally. So when we interview people that are starting on a team or about to start on a team, they don't get by with just, getting Brian Pugh to like them. And in fact, I'm just usually the first person that might speak to them. Obviously, it's an important conversation, but I want them to nail it with everyone, and vice versa. And I tell every candidate that we talk to, it's not just us having the opportunity to ask you questions and screen you. This is your opportunity to ask questions and screen us, because we're not right for everyone. Everyone's not right for us. And we're not going to sell any opportunity to anyone. We're going to tell you all about it. And if it speaks to the person, that's where we want to be. We want the opportunity to draw them in, and we want it to speak to them internally. So again, for me, culture is king. And if you don't look to lead with culture when you're building up a team from scratch, you can have a lot of process and a lot of components in place, but that's not going to get folks up in the morning. That's not going to get them excited about being part of a winning team. And that's what I really look for and key on, is when I'm looking to start teams, I want that first person out, and I'll use the analogy. I want that quarterback. I want that team captain. And again, it's Dave. It sounds like your guy. You nailed it with that first guy that you talked about and referred to. He was your team captain, just waiting to be developed into that role, and has become, even a coach or playing a bigger role on your team. So again, culture, culture, culture.
Brian, let me ask you this. How do
Yeah.
you know if somebody's delivering culture? Is it a gut feeling, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So when I interview with folks, it's funny. I'm probably non-traditional in how I interview folks. I don't sit and go through a resume top to bottom, which, when we're talking TA, a lot of folks would be taken back. Wow, you don't go through the resume. I really don't. I actually let the conversation naturally flow, and I take them back usually to early years. I want to know, what they were like from high school through college. I want to look, and I like to hear about things they've overcome, adversity that they faced, and really how they present themselves is, this will sound interesting to some, but if they seem to have controlled themselves through adversity versus it wasn't their fault, those types of things, those are real key things that I look at. From a purpose perspective, I love what they're talking to. I do teach the gut read. So you talked about your book, I'll talk about mine. So there's a book out by Joellen Demetrius called Reading People. She was actually the gal that chose the jury that got O.J. Simpson off of his conviction. So she's just an amazing read of people and can do so very quickly. I tell people all the time, if you have that 300-pound butt when you're talking to somebody in an interview situation, I love Sean. I think he's great. But, at that point, then I usually stop the conversation and I dig really hard into that person's, secondary thought. Okay, what's driving that? Fine, let's move on. That's not the right candidate for us. So you do have to be careful. There is a, 5 to 10% misread on people that you can have. But I'll tell you what, if we're right 90 to 95% of the time on gut read, we're doing okay.
Gotcha. I'd have to agree with that. That's a pretty good ratio. Rest of the panel, and any comments on what Brian was speaking to?
I think it's just spot on. So for me, and I'll kind of give my little spiel too. For me, culture is definitely king. So just making sure that you have someone that can join the team that is a good cultural fit, making sure that they can fit with the group, because that is what is essential. So I know for us at my organization, BSI, we actually went from, we tripled in size in 10 months, my recruiting team. And so it was, when we're bringing on people, I need to make sure that my internal stakeholders, I have their buy-in, right? I need to make sure that the processes are in place. I also need to make sure that this person is going to understand the dynamics of the team and can work within this team, and we can be successful. So their ultimate goal has to be, excellence, or being able to elevate and take things to the next level. And when I'm also bringing them on, though, I want to make sure that the team that I brought on, I want to ensure that they were diverse. So not only diverse in gender, diverse in race, ethnicity, but I also want to make sure they're diverse when it comes to thinking and experience. And so I have people that came from agencies, I have people that came from the staffing world, I have people that had their own recruiting firm at one point in time, and then I had newbies that worked in HR and then were transitioning and wanted to try out talent acquisition. And I would say that the diversity in our group, though, has helped us really truly step our game up. And so we come together as a group, we will, think about things, we'll collaborate, we'll say, this is what works, what doesn't work, let's tweak this process, let's solidify this process. And really truly we've been rocking it for a whole entire year and a half now. So that's my contribution.
Yeah, so Vera in the chat area beat me to the punch. So an addition to that conversation lately has been, so culture fit, kind of been around for a while, but now we're talking about culture add. So what are your thoughts around, and I'm going to throw my little 2 cents in here real quick. So you have culture fit versus culture add. I want to throw in the concept of principles, right? Because I like different cultures. I think a lot of people like experience different cultures. You can define culture in different ways, personalities, food, what have you, languages. But principles, I think, is like a good guiding point to, hey, these are our core principles, thou shalt not, whatever. But cultures I'd like being a little shaken up a little bit. So I'm a big fan of the culture add. Let me throw this back, and Crystal, you're just speaking to it. Let's throw it back to you. The culture add versus culture fit discussion that's been going.
So I think it's definitely very important. So for me, it is what is the value add that you can bring to this organization or to this team, right? And making sure that, again, it can elevate us as a group, as an organization, and take us to the next level. And so, yes, you can, fit within. We can have very similar personalities, or yes, we can, have similar principles or similar thoughts, but just making sure, again, that there's an added value add that they can bring, that each member can bring.
Yeah,
Brian?
I would.
Go ahead, Dave.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah, I would
Dave.
just add real quickly. I mean, two things. Number one, I think it's important to be disciplined about what works for your organization and what's most important to you for, as Brian said, what works in your organization, and to be disciplined about evaluating those. And then the final thing, or the other thing I would add, is I've learned perhaps more from our misses with recruiters than some good hires. Not the great hires. The great hires are the great hires, and you're always going to learn from those. But some of the misses that we've made, I've learned more from them than some other hires.
Tom or Brian?
I'll jump in. Crystal, great job on being a proponent and driving, the culture ad. I think, that's the next step. Once you have started bringing folks on board, really being, getting that sort of lightning in a bottle where you're allowing those folks to bring what their special sauce is into your overall corporate recipe. That's pretty fantastic. And I think that's when you start taking a team to the next level, is allowing those diverse ideas, those diverse thoughts, and nothing, makes me smile more as a coach than watching that happen without me having to constantly prod, folks for doing it. So again, kudos to you. I tip my hat, because obviously that's the environment that you've built there. And I think that's when, again, you start cooking with fire.
Absolutely.
What about, so let me throw this at you, because the recruiters get tasked with a lot of different things, right? Before we used just to process resumes, now we were sourcing, and now we're recruitment marketing, now we're brand managers, employment brand managers. Are we now becoming kind of culture ambassadors, for lack of better words? Is that kind of put on us now? Because to me, it makes sense, because we're outbound on a daily basis with people outside of our company. Great opportunity to represent.
So I think it's an inherent responsibility of a recruiter to make the absolute finest impression of your organization from the very first touch, whether it's email, LinkedIn, reach out, that they've responded. So to me, that very first impression is so representative of the process ahead. And if it's, shady shoddy, or if they're doing, again, if you've even brought that sort of person into your culture, it gets right back to it. You probably made a mistake day one. But yeah, I do believe that's a responsibility to give you the short answer there.
I do too. I think that as a recruiter, it's your responsibility to provide clear expectations to your candidates, and to let them know exactly, and to describe as best as you can to what type of culture the organization stands for, or is within the organization, or is within the team in which they're joining. Because like I think Brian said it, or maybe Dave, it may not be a good fit. And so I definitely feel like it's our job to be cultural ambassadors.
Tom, anything to add on that piece?
Yeah, I think it's key. I think we've probably all had the experience of bringing in one bad apple, and how that affects the even larger organization as a whole. So I think we have to be culture ambassadors, and that's very much part of our job today.
Yes. So sort of sticking with this topic of, hey, here's another job that's going to be put on her desk coming pretty soon, with Slack and Slack groups and communities. And the developers, there's very strong communities with developers. There's strong communities with marketers, trying to do this with recruiters and stuff like that. If we get into social media marketing, right, the term influencers, right, they're out there influencing. You can define what you want, what that really means. You look at like an Apple or a Google, their influencers for their companies are the executives. At a much smaller scale, at more a community scale, would recruiters ever get to that point? Or is it, hey, I got too many recs to fill, I got to focus on that, and that's as much time as I have to do is taken. But as far as like getting into seeing what companies do, to all the conversations that are going on in the country right now, you'll see the pushback when all they do is change the banner. Well, what else are you doing, right? Where's the action? That's just a word for lack of better words. Are recruiters going to become some type of influencers, not just for their company, but kind of just for the philosophy of their company, much more than it's great to work here?
Yeah, I mean, the intersection of recruiting and marketing, in my opinion, has never been more pronounced. And if you're not, marketing and target marketing and specific campaigns to whether it's developers or whatever skills you're looking for, that's how you have to engage with candidates, especially high caliber talent that isn't they're not coming to you. You have to go get them, right? And you have to find a way to engage with them, and that's a process. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's probably not going to happen with one touch point. It's going to happen with multiple touch points, and that's all about branding and marketing.
I agree. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think right now in our virtual setting, reputation and brand is everything. And I think you're seeing more input on Glassdoor, et cetera, than we've ever seen. So we have to be aware, and great tie-in to marketing and recruiting. That's something that companies should be doing more of.
And I've been encouraging my team as of late to ensure that they are posting on LinkedIn, but not just posting jobs, but posting, like why it's good to work for BSI, why we're a great company. So let's post on pre-COVID, of course, like let's post on the events that we were having. Let's post on, some of the activities that the organization was hosting. And so for us, I think it is kind of going back to ensuring that we're constantly being cultural ambassadors, not only for the organization, but also for, our team.
I did a run there for like a year with the Tribune Publishing. So like LA Times, Chicago Tribune, Baltimore Sun. I got to see what reporters were responsible for when it came to promoting their stories, basically. And social media and Twitter, and you had so many tweets, and you got to promote your stories and stuff like that. You kind of look at TV news stations, what the reporters do to engage with their community. I keep thinking, I wonder if this is ever going to hit recruiters, because they have too many recs on their desk now. If another ask comes down here, how are they going to do it? But it seems just like a natural jump to being that, especially if you have an expertise. Like if you're a tech recruiter, you're building expertise in tech. If you're an executive search, you do your expertise as executives. But then there's corporate as a big bucket. Well, who do you recruit for? I recruit for corporate positions. Well, that's a whole lot of stuff. But building that expertise in certain areas, I always wondered if it was somebody who's out there sort of plugging them, not necessarily to build a network with other recruiters, but really that network with the talent that they're recruiting. So if I'm a tech recruiter, am I all about GitHub, or am I about going to, tech events and things like that, just to build my brand with my talent to support that pipeline? But anyways, I'm kind of rambling. But any things to add to that piece? Okay. All right. So we've gone a little bit over. My apologies. That went pretty quick, actually. I kind of felt like I was hogging the conversation. I hope I wasn't, but I find this type of stuff interesting. And I will add this piece of it to continue to hog the conversation. We started off with like the science of recruiting, and we kind of got into the art of recruiting. I'm glad that we covered both areas, because I think it is that combination of both science and art when it comes to doing this job. And it's one of those jobs where I don't really know what it is until you actually go do it. So I always find it interesting when people who've never recruited say they know, well, you should do this. Well, it's a lot more complicated than you think, but that's just my opinion. All right. Any final comments or thoughts on the topic? Okay. All right. Well, with that said, thank you everybody for this conversation today. It was a good one. I think it's going to come in
Thank you,
handy as the
everyone.
country starts up again. All right. Have a good day,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
having
Sean.
us.
Bye-bye.